I visited a family today in a tower block where someone's written "no spitting" on the stairwell wall. Not the council, a resident. Handwritten, capital letters, underlined twice. And the thing is, it's working. That stairwell is spotless. Not because people read the sign and felt civic pride, because people read the sign and thought, whoever wrote this is watching. That's all it takes, apparently. Not a law, not a fine, not a community meeting with biscuits and an agenda. Just the suspicion that someone, somewhere, might be paying attention. I've been thinking about that all afternoon. About how much of what we call good behaviour is just performance for an audience we've assumed into existence. We don't litter because someone might see. We smile at neighbours because they might be looking. We hold doors because, well, sometimes because we're decent, but sometimes because the alternative is being seen not holding the door. And that's a version of ourselves we don't want witnessed. On the walk tonight, I passed a woman sitting in a bay window, very still, cup of tea, staring out at the street. And every person who walked past her house stood a little straighter. I could see it, the tiny adjustment, the performance of being watched. I've got a story about a street that made that adjustment for 2 years, for a woman who couldn't see a thing.
Oh, you're smiling. That usually means someone's about to be humiliated.
Not humiliated, exposed, gently, with affection.
Well, what's tonight?
A widow, blind, a bay window, and the best-behaved street in Bethnal Green.
Best behaved how?
Entirely by accident. There was a street in Bethnal Green called Mather Row. 12 terraced houses, a shared alley, and the kind of communal understanding that relies heavily on nobody asking too many questions. It was not, by any standard, a well-behaved street. Mr. Potts at number 3 dumped his coal ash in the shared alley every Tuesday and denied it every Wednesday. The Garrick boys, 14 and 16, built like wardrobes, kicked a ball against Mrs. Henley's wall until the plaster cracked, and Mrs. Henley was too frightened to say anything because their father was the size of a small horse and had the temperament of a wasp in a jar. Mr. Newell at number 11 reliably urinated against the lamppost on Saturday nights after the pub, which everyone knew because everyone could smell it on Sunday mornings. And Mrs. Flood at number 7 watered down the milk she resold to neighbours with the confidence of a woman who believed God was busy elsewhere. This was Mather Row. Functional, imperfect, getting on with it. Then Mrs. Chalice moved into number 9.
And Mrs. Chalice was?
73, blind since birth. A widow. Her husband had been a dock foreman who died the previous winter. She was moved to Mather Row by a nephew who visited once, carried her trunk upstairs, and was never seen again. She was also, and this matters, terrifying to look at. Not because she was cruel, because she was built. Tall, broad, a jaw like a magistrate. She wore black, always black, and sat in the bay window of number 9 every afternoon with her hands folded in her lap and her face pointed directly at the street. Like a lighthouse. A lighthouse made of disapproval.
A lighthouse made of disapproval. I want that on my gravestone.
The change began within 3 days. Mr. Potts went to dump his ash on Tuesday and glanced at number 9. Mrs. Chalice was at the window, staring. Not at him, at nothing because she couldn't see. But Potts didn't know that. He saw a large woman in black, jaw set, eyes fixed in his general direction, and he thought, not today. He carried his ash to the proper tip for the first time in 4 years. Wednesday came. No ash in the alley. Mrs. Henley thought she was dreaming. The Garrick boys were next. They came out with their ball on Saturday afternoon. The older one threw it at the wall, caught the bounce, wound up for the second throw, and looked at number 9. Mrs. Chalice was at the window, tea in hand, face like a hanging judge. The boy held the ball, looked at his brother, and they walked to the park. Mrs. Henley's wall survived an entire weekend for the first time since the boys had learned to throw. Mr. Newell was the most dramatic conversion. Saturday night, pub closing. Newell approached his lamppost with the steady purpose of a man performing a weekly sacrament. He reached the lamppost. He looked up. Mrs. Chalice was at the window. At 11:30, in the dark, a silhouette. Still, monumental. Newell crossed the street and used the public lavatory 2 roads over. The lavatory had been there for 9 years. Newell had never once acknowledged its existence.
She reformed a public urinator with posture.
She was listening to a radio play. She had no idea Newell existed. She had no idea the lamppost existed. She was listening to a dramatization of Bleak House and drinking her tea and being, by her own account, perfectly content.
What about the milkwoman, Mrs. Flood?
Well, Mrs. Flood was the masterpiece. Mrs. Flood had been watering down her resold milk for 2 years. Not dramatically, just enough to stretch a profit. A splash here, a splash there. Nobody complained because nobody could prove it, and besides, Mrs. Flood had a way of looking wounded if you questioned anything she sold, as though you'd insulted her grandmother personally. One morning, Mrs. Flood was carrying her milk pail past number 9. She looked up. Mrs. Chalice was at the window. And Mrs. Chalice, who couldn't see the pail, the milk, or Mrs. Flood, happened at that exact moment to shake her head. She was disagreeing with something on the radio. A political opinion, a cricket score. Nobody will ever know. But Mrs. Flood saw a large woman in black staring directly at her, shaking her head. Mrs. Flood went home. She poured out the watered milk, she refilled the pail from the honest jug, and for the first time in 2 years, May the Roe drank full-fat milk. The next morning, Mrs. Henley said to Mrs. Potts, "Have you noticed the milk's better?" Mrs. Potts said, "The woman at number 9's got her eye on things." Mrs. Henley agreed. Neither of them had spoken to Mrs. Chalice. Neither of them would. And here's what gets me. Mrs. Chalice had no idea any of this was happening. She sat in her window because the sun was warm and the radio was there, and the street sounded alive. She told the postman, the only person who knew she was blind, because he handed her the post and she felt for it instead of looking. She told him it was a lovely street. Quiet. Considerate. She said she felt lucky.
She was hearing the performance and thinking it was real.
She built the whole neighborhood in sound. And the sound said, "Good people, kind street." Because it was. For her. Because of her. Because they thought she could see. The postman, a man named Harlow, was the only person on May the Roe who understood the full comedy of what was happening. He delivered to every house. He knew Potts had stopped dumping ash. He knew the Garrick boys had discovered the park. He knew Newell had found the public lavatory. He knew the milk was honest. And he knew Mrs. Chalice was blind. He told me, well, he told someone who told someone who told me, which is how all the best stories about postmen survive. He said he'd walk down May the Roe some mornings and watch grown adults straighten their jackets as they passed number 9. Men would remove their hats. Women would smooth their hair. The Garrick boy's father, the man the size of a small horse, once tipped his cap at the window. He tipped his cap at a blind woman listening to the afternoon racing results. Harlow said he nearly bit through his own lip trying not to laugh. But he never told anyone. Because the street was better. Genuinely, measurably better. And the reason was a fiction, but the result was real. And Harlow, who'd been delivering to streets far worse than May the Roe, wasn't about to dismantle the only scarecrow that had ever worked on humans.
So, the entire moral improvement of Mather Row was based on the assumption that a blind woman could see them.
Every bit of it. The ash, the ball, the milk, the lamppost. All of it held in place by the possibility of being watched by a woman who was listening to Bleak House.
Did it last?
Well, she died 2 years later, in her sleep. The nephew came back, cleared the flat, and the truth came out. The postman told Mrs. Henley told everyone, and by the end of the week, Mather Row knew that Mrs. Chalice had been blind the entire time. Mr. Potts kept using the proper tip. He'd been doing it for 2 years by then, and the habit had outlasted its reason. The Garrick boys had grown up a bit and discovered girls, which is a more effective behavioral correction than any window. Mrs. Henley's wall was safe, but Mrs. Flood's milk thinned within a fortnight. Newell and the lamppost were reunited on the first Saturday, and the small courtesies, the tipped hats, the straightened jackets, the morning greetings aimed at a bay window, stopped. Not all at once, not dramatically. They just faded, the way color fades from a curtain left in the sun, slowly enough that nobody noticed, and quickly enough that it mattered. The street didn't become terrible again. It became what it had been before. Average. Ordinary. Getting on with it. Which is all it ever was. The goodness was real while it lasted. The milk was genuinely full fat. The alley was genuinely clean. The boys genuinely went to the park. But it was goodness held in place by the fear of being seen, and when the seeing stopped, when the window went dark and the truth came out, the goodness that had no foundation underneath it simply drifted away, like smoke when you open a window.
She was the best thing that ever happened to that street, and she never knew it. And the street only deserved her when it thought she was watching.
That's the structure of most authority, isn't it? The law doesn't prevent crime. The possibility of being caught prevents crime. Remove the possibility, and you find out what the behavior was actually made of.
But here's the bit that gets me. Some of it stuck. Potts still uses the tip. The habit became real. It started as a performance and turned into something honest. Not all of it, but some. And I don't know what to do with that, because it means the performance isn't worthless. Even a lie held long enough can build something true underneath it. Potts doesn't dump ash anymore, not because Mrs. Chalice might see, because he stopped being the kind of man who does that. The window started it, but the window isn't the reason anymore.
That's the most generous interpretation of surveillance I've ever heard.
Maybe, but here's the question. How much of your good behavior depends on the possibility that someone might be watching? Not God, not the law, just another person. A neighbor, a colleague, a stranger on the bus. If you knew, absolutely knew, that no one would ever see, would you still carry the ash to the tip? Would you still hold the door? Would you still be the person you perform in public? Or is that person a costume you wear near windows?
I'd like to think I'd be the same.
I wouldn't. And I think anyone who says otherwise hasn't checked.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And I don't think that makes us bad. I think it makes us human. I just wish being human didn't require an audience.